Here we go. All right, so tonight's talk is what I was going to talk about last week, which is decisiveness. And I've talked about elements of this before, but I really like this idea. I think that it's very fitting with our practice. And decisiveness could take on a lot of different meanings. And when we talk about it in our practice, most often what I'm talking about is not second guessing. So, for example, your partner's holding mitts for you to hit, and a lot of times what people do is they think, oh, I'm going to throw this. Oh, wait a minute, I threw that last time, and they start getting up in their head, and it takes a really long time to get to the point, which is just to hit the mitt. And it's a different state of mind, it's a different state of consciousness to be in, and not one that we generally have a tendency to be in, because kind of our lives are kind of at this lazy, slower pace, and sometimes you might find yourself, driving down the freeway and somebody cuts in front of you and you have to do something quick almost without thinking about it. But this is something that outside of kind of weird situations like that, we don't normally find ourselves in situations like that. So our practice is kind of a unique way of dealing with it. And it's very important from a self-defense perspective to be decisive, obviously. Because if somebody's swinging a punch at you and you just stand there and go, I'm not sure what to do right now, that's not going to go well for you. But outside of self-defense, there are plenty of opportunities where it's very helpful to be decisive. And sometimes it's necessary to be decisive like in a split second. Sometimes that is when your safety is at risk. Sometimes it's when you're just in a conversation and you need to kind of be on your toes and be able to solve a situation at work, or just in a conversation that has maybe turned into an argument. And this ability to not second guess ourselves, to be decisive and kind of powerful with what we do in the rest of life is super important, and starts with what we practice in the dojo. So lately I've been reading this book that's been around for a little while called Thinking Fast and Slow. Anybody read that before? It's a good one. So I'm going to talk about some general concepts from that, but I'm going to pull more from this book, which I have covered in Post-it notes, Hagakure, which is a book that we have at the dojo. The basic idea with thinking fast and slow is that we have two systems of thought, and it doesn't actually work this way in our minds, but practically speaking, effectively, you can look at it like we have system one, which is the system that makes quick decisions, the system that kind of takes in everything and immediately makes what is sometimes a rash decision, but oftentimes is pretty impressive what our minds are able to do, to deduce from situations. For example, you're driving down the freeway and somebody cuts you off. A lot of times we move into another lane of traffic at the right speed and at the right time to not cause a multiple car pileup. Sometimes we mess that up, but most often times we don't. And it's kind of incredible what we're able to do. So that system one is like this part of our mind that can take things from an intuitive standpoint and just make rapid decisions. And it, again, doesn't have to be an issue of safety. It could just be like a quick judgment, and it's oftentimes comparing options. So it's like being able to compare, the option of saying this versus saying that in a conversation. It's the option of, or it's the comparison of when somebody asks you, like, which color do I look better in? I guess it's not a great example. I've never been asked that before, I don't think. But it's something like that. Somebody's asking you to guess, like, how many piano tuners live in Los Angeles, and you kind of have to just be able to make a quick judgment based on what you have in your head about a situation. System two is the system that really should be in charge of certain things. It's a slower, more deliberative system. So this is like if somebody did ask you how many piano tuners there are in the city of Los Angeles, you shouldn't just pull something out of your whatever. You should kind of think about it for a second. And the funny thing is, this system doesn't get used very often. We usually use kind of the lazy system 1 because we don't have to set aside time and effort and really think things through. This logical process that system 2 uses, while it's much more accurate, it's also a lot slower and energy intensive. So the first quote that I want to read from Hagakure is based on this idea of making fast comparisons. So this is the Book of the Samurai, written by a samurai. And one of the things the passage says, when the time comes, there is no moment for reasoning. And if you have not done your inquiring beforehand, there's most often shame. Reading books and listening to people's talk are fine for the purpose of prior resolution. Above all, the way of the samurai should be in being aware that you do not know what is going to happen next, and in querying every item day and night. It sounds kind of stressful. Victory and defeat are matters of the temporary force of circumstances. And he ends by saying, the way of avoiding shame is different. It is simply in death. So that's a little bit more dramatic than I'm going to get into tonight. But he's talking about on the battlefield. If you're choosing between am I going to try to run away or do something to get out of this situation, or just dive in head first and be decisive about it, then that's the thing to do. And you might die, and if you're doing it from a standpoint of, I've made my peace, I know that death is going to come to me someday, so I'm just going to go for it now and hope for the best. You need that if you're going to be in a battle, because all the second guessing doesn't work very well. You slow yourself down and you make it even more likely that you're going to die. Now, we don't have to be in a life or death situation to be able to use this idea. He mentions the idea of reading books and listening to people's talk and doing that prior to making a decision. And this is important. This is part of system 2, where it's I'm spending my time getting the necessary information to make these comparisons, and sometimes I'll take my time with it and be deliberate and eventually come to the right decision. And sometimes you get this very satisfying experience of, I really weighed all of the options, and I made my decision, and I'm sticking to it, and I feel great about it. And very often we don't feel that satisfying experience. And I'm going to talk more about this later on. But if you are kind of regularly training your mind to go through this process of weighing options in a measured way, and then deciding from the best of them, you're going to make quicker, better decisions, but also you're going to have this sense of completeness that is going to allow you to kind of move on with it. Very important. And so we retrain our brains with new information. We change the way that we decide to think between things. This book, Thinking Fast and Slow, is filled with these fascinating and hilarious paradoxes, these choices basically that people make that are totally silly. The one that sticks out in my mind is you're shopping for a house, and you see on the market, you see a modern house, you see another modern house that costs $5,000 less but needs a new roof, and then you see a bungalow. And these are the only 3 options that you have. Well, very few people decide, I'm going to get that bungalow, because they don't know what to compare it to. So they don't know if this is a good deal or not, but they see these 2 modern houses and they say, well, this one needs a new roof, so I'm going with the other one. And we kind of go through this process very often, which, as you can tell, it's not necessarily going to always lead to the right decision. You've got to be able to have more information sometimes, or more importantly, you got to be able to recognize when I'm making this decision based on a false comparison. where I'm just kind of, taking the easy way out to make this decision, and then be able to set aside some time and say, like, you know what, I'm going to have to live with this decision, literally. So I'm going to put a little bit more time and research and effort into it. But we very often, even if it is just in the beginning of a longer process in our minds, we very often jump to these conclusions based on pretty bad information, based on faulty comparisons, and then we get attached to those things. And then the rest of this process is flawed by that. We've got this thing stuck in our heads, and it's very hard to let go of that and to move on to a better way of thinking about it. So this is one reason that meditation is so important, because it helps us get back to this state of an empty mind, the state of mushin, where we can fill our consciousness with the kind of information that's relevant, that's important, that helps us make decisions like this, rather than to have all of these attachments floating around and kind of mucking up the water. Another thing that I like to bring up here is like this position that we find ourselves in all the time in society today, and I keep blaming things on society, but it's our fault too, we made it. It's like too many choices. And Stephen Brown loves to talk about Baskin Robbins. You got 31 flavors, who can choose, and you're standing in there, and you're looking at all of these options, and the logical thing to do would be to choose something that looks delicious, buy it, eat it, and enjoy it. But that's not what we do with ice cream. We stand there and we go, what am I going to do? There are way too many options and they all look so delicious, and I want this one, but also I really want that one, but what about this one over here? And it's all like we're kind of basing our hesitance and our decision-making process on what we're afraid of losing or what we're afraid of missing out on. And this shows up in a lot of different situations in the world today. I think dating. I don't know how anybody finds somebody to date in the city of Los Angeles, especially like with online dating. It's insane. You like swiping through people, and there are 1,000 people that all look kind of like the same. How could you ever decide? It's crazy. So we put ourselves in this situation, and we find ourselves unable to get out of it because of the attachments that we have and these quick and easy comparisons that we make between things. So the next time you go shopping for whatever, or you're sitting in a Baskin Robbins or a Froyo, what do we have here? Yogurtland? Yeah, we've got all these different options. Just choose one and kind of try to be happy with it. The second quote is referring to this. So once a decision is made, you got to be able to stick to it, not have regrets. So later on he says, in the words of the ancients, and anytime you invoke the words of the ancients, you know this, people are going to pay attention. One should make his decision within the space of 7 breaths. Lord Takanobu said, maybe he was one of the ancients, if discrimination is long, it will spoil. Lord Naoshige said, when matters are done leisurely, 7 out of 10 will turn out badly. A warrior is a person who does things quickly. So, some of this is kind of pointing to the idea of being able to make a quick decision. And as I've said, sometimes that's good, sometimes that's bad. But I like the idea of making the decision and then moving on from it. So if you make a decision from the right frame of mind, stick to it. And this is the other place that we get tripped up is we may have made a totally great, valid choice. This decision was wonderful, but then we go back and we start second guessing ourselves, and then you can't be happy with that decision. You can't move on. You can't be acting powerfully with this decision that you've made. You're always kind of tethered to all the other possibilities that you're worried about missing out on. So I like this idea of 7 breaths. You might decide, like, you know what, this is something that needs more than 7 breaths. I'm going to do some research and figure it out. But then you figured it out, get outside of 7 breaths from that decision and don't look back. Don't keep going back on, well, what if I did this, or what if I forgot about that, or all of that stuff. You know what? If you made the wrong decision, it's going to become obvious soon enough. Without you, trying to trip yourself up, just go forward and be with it. So this book has another quote, which I couldn't find in the actual book with the time that I had today. But this is my favorite quote from this book, which is very powerful. There's surely nothing other than the single purpose of the present moment. A man's whole life is a succession of moment after moment. There will be nothing else to do, nothing else to pursue. Live being true to the single purpose of the moment. So this is really true about the way that we want to live our lives as martial artists, living in the present, being in the moment, not worrying about what the future is going to hold, or being stuck in the past and all the mistakes that we've made. Being in the present is the only way to make decisions, and is the only way to live, is the only way to be. All the other stuff is just an illusion. And when we're making decisions, it's really important to keep this kind of a mindset, and to be acting from the present, and to assess whatever we need to assess, and then just be totally grounded in the here and now. And from that point, you're going to feel solid in your ability to choose something. And I've experienced both sides of this. You guys know I'm still a human being. I've not hit enlightenment yet. And sometimes I make choices very powerfully and move on from them, and I am great about that. And then every once in a while I won't. I'll feel myself being, tugged back and forth between options, or between a ton of different options. And then I have to remind myself of this. Like, I can let myself be pulled, back and forth, or just kind of knocked around by all of these decisions that need to be made and that I'm not making, and not really live in the moment and be present. Or I can just make the decision and move on. And it's like, no matter how far down the wrong road that you've gone, when you recognize that that was the wrong road, you can just turn around and go back the other way. So it's not like once you make a decision, a lot of times at least, that you're going to be stuck with it for the rest of your life. Sometimes you will be, okay. But you want to go forth with this understanding that if I choose this, which is very different from the experience of feeling forced into something. It's very different from the experience that we have when we feel like, oh, I'm missing out on this option, or I'm missing out on this option. I'm being forced to make a decision now, and I don't really like that feeling. It's a very different experience from that when you choose something and you continue to choose it. I think that this is like, if you're in a relationship, so important. If you choose to be with somebody, and you just continue to choose. You choose, like, I choose this person exactly the way that they are, rather than like I'm stuck here and there's no way out. You might be stuck, but if you choose that path, then that kind of a powerful frame of mind is going to lead you to a totally different experience of life, from each individual decision to wherever comes after it. So that's the last thing that I want to make the point of tonight, is when we are in the moment, totally present, and we powerfully choose something, that is super important, powerful. And then just continue to choose it, and then be willing to recognize this was the wrong decision. Be willing to, be open to whatever it is actually out there in reality after the decision is made. But without forcing that to happen by yourself, without the second guessing coming from within you. Basically, if something else happens that causes you to need to rethink something, and it's coming from outside, like, take that information in and be able to do it. But if you make the choice and then you're always going back into your head and second guessing and it's coming from within you, then this is the sign that what you're doing is not really helpful, it's not really powerful. So just move on and be with it. To be able to choose our circumstances and to be able to choose our actions is so important. I was talking about this in class the other day. Like I found myself a little while ago just sitting at dinner with somebody who was a perfectly fine human being I'd known for the better part of a year, but I just wasn't feeling like being there that night. And I thought, oh, I'm stuck here. I got to sit here and have this conversation and just kind of be bored and whatever. Because I can't leave because I'm a polite person. But then I realized, actually I could leave. I mean, I don't even have to come up with an excuse. I could just say, you know what, I don't feel like this tonight, sorry, I'll see you later. And I could have just gotten up and left. And I didn't, but knowing that I had that option and then deciding in that moment, I'm choosing to stay here. I'm choosing to be here with this person. I'm choosing to be in this situation, truly. That just opens it up and it frees your mind and makes you feel so much more calm and centered in that situation. So try to have this experience as often as possible where even if going into a situation you feel like you're stuck, where you feel like you're going to be missing out on all kinds of other options if you choose, just choose anyways. And like, let's be real, most of the decisions that we have to make in our lives are not that dramatic and monumental. It's like, am I going to take this road or drive one more block down and take the next road? And sometimes that decision is made for you by ways. But you have all of these opportunities to practice this in life, just like we do in the dojo. And I think that this is one of the best things that we can do for our own sanity, is to practice choosing, choose powerfully, stick with it, and just go forth. That's going to help you be in the moment as well, not always going back to the past and worrying about it. So when we meditate, we make the choice, I'm going to sit and breathe. And I'm not going to stress about what happened earlier in this day or what I think is going to happen tomorrow. I choose to be here in the present. And when these other thoughts come up and try to pull me away from this moment, it's easier for me to set those aside because it's my choice to sit here. And when my body starts to ache and I feel like I have to move or I've got this itch or whatever is driving me crazy, I can choose, no, I've decided to sit still. So I'm just going to let all that other stuff go. It's not impacting me right now. Or I could decide my hip is going to explode if I don't move right now. So I am choosing to move, in fact. And then as soon as I move, I'll let that go and choose to come right back here to the present rather than, oh, I moved, I'm such a failure at martial arts, meditation, and at life. Because that's just another version of the same thing. So whatever it is that you find yourself in, just choose to be here and now. And move forward decisively, like you would as a samurai on the field of battle, without necessarily having to face death or chop somebody else's head off, but with the same kind of momentum, the same kind of decisiveness. So let's practice that now with our meditation. Sit.